All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're diving into a pretty bold idea, a controversial one, really. It comes from coach and CEO Michelle de Havilland, and she argues that one of the most sacred ideas in coaching, unconditional positive regard, yeah, she says for high performers, it's not just useless, it's complete nonsense. So let's unpack that.
And wow, she does not pull any punches, does she? This quote right here really sets the tone. It's direct, it's blunt, and it makes the case that when the stakes are high, when you are metaphorically bleeding out, passive empathy is the last thing you need. It's just a waste of time.
So before we can really tear something down, we have to understand what it is we're looking at. The author calls this the myth of acceptance. So let's first explore this beautiful, elegant theory that's about to be put under the microscope. So, what is this thing we're talking about? Well, here's the classic definition. It comes from the legendary psychologist Carl Rogers. He called it unconditional positive regard, or UPR for short. And the idea is pretty simple, really. It's that if you accept and support someone completely, no judgment, no strings attached, you create this perfectly safe space where they can grow. That's the theory, anyway.
And there it is. That's the pivot. The author admits, yeah, it sounds beautiful. It's an elegant concept. But then comes the real question. Does this idealistic theory actually work for high achievers who are dealing with the messy, complicated, and often brutal real world?
Okay, so now we're getting to the heart of the argument. This is where we contrast that gentle academic theory with the world that executives and leaders actually have to operate in. And let me tell you, that world is anything but unconditional.
You know, it's a simple but powerful point. The author is basically saying that building a coaching style on a foundation of unconditional is like building a house on sand. Why? Because the real world just doesn't work that way. Think about it. Performance reviews, the stock market, profit margins, they are all conditional.
And this slide just lays out that clash so perfectly. Over here, in Theoryland, you've got pure empathy, no judgment, this idea that you are enough. But over here, in reality, you have hard performance metrics, volatile market conditions, and, actual moral and ethical lines that you just can't cross. The two just don't seem to sync up.
This quote really makes you think. Just imagine a CEO who's in the middle of laying off hundreds of people or facing a massive lawsuit. At that moment, someone telling them they're enough just as they are doesn't just miss the mark. The author argues it's actually insulting because it totally minimizes the weight and responsibility of that situation.
So, if a warm, comfy blanket isn't the answer, then what is? Well, the argument is discomfort. True growth, the kind that top performers are looking for, doesn't come from being coddled. It comes from finally having to face the hard truths. The coach's job? To be that mirror.
This brings us to the alternative. So if the coach isn't this passive, all-accepting listener, then what are they? The author gives us a really powerful new image, the sparring partner.
I love this side-by-side because it's so clear, right? The polite coach can easily become just an echo chamber or a cheerleader. The sparring partner, on the other hand, is a thinking equal, a truth teller. And look at that shift in questioning. It moves away from the purely emotional, how does that feel, to the much tougher analytical question, is that valid?
Now, this isn't just some tough guy philosophy that sounds good. There's actually real science that supports this idea of productive pressure. It's called the Yerkes-Dodson law, and it's a principle from psychology that's been around for over a century. And here's the gist of it. If you have too little stress, you're bored, you're zoned out, you underperform. If you have way too much, you get overwhelmed by anxiety and you basically shut down. But right there in the middle, that zone of moderate stress, that's the sweet spot. That's where we are focused, engaged, and our brains are literally primed to learn and perform at our best. So, this all leads us to the formal definition. The challenging coaching method completely reframes the coach's role. They're not a passive listener anymore. They're an active catalyst. The whole point isn't to get rid of tension, but to create this useful, productive tension right in between support and challenge. That's where the real growth happens. And this quote really hits the nail on the head. It's all about that balance, right? Because think about it. Challenge without any support, that's just being mean. It's brutal. But support without any challenge, well, the guys who came up with this model have a word for that, collusion. You're basically just nodding along, enabling someone to stay stuck. You're not helping. All right, let's start to tie all these threads together. What is the real point of this kind of coaching? It really comes down to a fundamental shift in the whole purpose of the job.
This is the mission statement, plain and simple. It's not about being your client's best friend. It's about delivering real, tangible value. And sometimes being useful means you have to say the hard thing, the thing that might not make you popular in that moment. A great coach has to be willing to do that. So, what does this useful coach actually look like in practice? Well, they're forensic, digging into the details. They're strategic, seeing the big picture. They are a truth teller, an advisor, and a true thinking equal who can stand shoulder to shoulder with the sharpest minds out there. I mean, come on, what an image. This completely redefines the role. It's moving coaching away from being this passive, reflective thing and turning it into an active, strategic command role. It's about tactics, it's about action, it's about winning out there in the real world. And here it is, the final big idea. The goal is not to wrap your client in bubble wrap to shield them from reality. No. The goal is to give them the armor, the mindset, and the resilience to face that reality head on and win. It's all about preparation, not protection. So we're going to end with this question because it turns that mirror right back on us. Whether you're a leader, a parent, a colleague, or a friend, it's a really good question to ask yourself. When you offer support, are you actually helping someone grow, or are you just comfortably colluding with where they already are? It's a challenging thought, for sure.